Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Way back Wednesdays. Today we're celebrating the birthday of the Marine Corps. That's right. It was created, or invented, or decreed, or set up, whatever word you want to use. Today, I think it was today. Maybe it was yesterday. I don't remember. Anyway, it's in Joe's ramblings. Ready for our shout out? Ready? Ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. The shout out is for our friend. Let's see who it is today. Alright, so we have got a sack race. I've never seen one of these. I've never done one of these. If you have, let me know. We've got Afro Mex in the lead, and there's Fine and New York Queen and Griffins and Deej and Elise and Heather and Tour, Hillbilly, Pete, Yoga. Yoga, you look like the guy from Fairly Odd Parents. The military dude. Can't think of his name. Jordan, that it is. We've got Tour. Fine is currently slightly in the lead. Carter, Afromax, Gen X, Mike's Chaotic. Oh, geez, Mike. We're excited all of a sudden. Got some energy there. There's Small. She stole. On location. Is it going to be on location? I think it's going to be on location. It is on location. On location. Photographs and videos while on location. With Scott, it says. And as you can see, we've got some photography information, flowers, bikes, trees. Ooh, shrimp tank. Joe's like that one. So if you're interested in photography or filmmaking or anything else, locations, check them out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Zoom me out because of reasons. There it goes. And then, oh, I am recording. All right, Mr. Bud.
Okay, interesting item of the day. July 11th, 1798. Quick show of hands. It's all in the dark. There's no hands to be seen. There was a founding of an important branch, if you will, of the military here in the United States. As a current service, the United States Marine Corps on that date was set up and made official. Interestingly enough, they also carry a second birthday, November the 10th, in 1775, as the Continental Marines. Now, this force is part of the United States military. It is usually more considered part of the Navy due to the use of how they tend to operate in many theaters, both with aircraft and landing operations. Taking a look at the general tree, it says, has been part of the Department of the Navy since the 30th of June in 1834. The United States Marine Corps operates installations on land and aboard seagoing amphibious warfare ships around the world. Additionally, several of the Marines' tactical aviation squadrons, primarily Marine fighter attack squadrons, are also embedded in Navy carrier air wings and operate from aircraft carriers. Now, the history began when 2 battalions of Continental Marines were formed on the 10th of November in Philadelphia, 1775, as a service branch of infantry troops capable of fighting both at sea and on shore. In the Pacific Theater of World War II, the Corps took the lead in launching massive campaigns of amphibious warfare, advancing from island to island, and as of 2022, the U.S. Marine Corps has about 177,200 active duty members and some 32,400 personnel in reserve. Now, the interesting part, as I was doing a little dig, is they talk about, there's 180,000 active personnel, 32,000 reserve personnel that they can have as backup. 1,304 manned aircraft, primarily a maritime landing force, but they have a list of the different engagements that our Marines have taken part in, going all the way back to the American Revolutionary War, the First Barbary War, the War of 1812, the Second Barbary War, anti-piracy operations in the West Indies, Seminole Wars, African anti-slavery operations, Aegean Sea anti-piracy operations, several Sumatran expeditions, the United States exploring expeditions, capturing of Monterey, the Mexican-American War, bombardment of Greytown, the First Fiji expedition, Second Opium War, Second Fiji expedition, Paraguay expedition, Reform War, John Brown's raid, American Civil War. The list goes on. I mean, it's like, where do you want to go see the world? The Marines were there, one way or another. Now, like everything else with the military, you have your commander-in-chief, which is usually the president. In this case, right now, we've got Biden, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Navy Carlos Del Toro, Commandant Acting General Eric M. Smith. He's also the Assistant Commandant at the moment. And then a Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps is Troy E. Black. Now, for history, going down through the foundation, Major Samuel Nicholas was the first Commandant of the Marine Corps, was nominated to lead the Continental Marines by John Adams. Now, the date, again, the 10th of November, is still celebrated to this date as the birthday of the Marine Corps. Nicholas raised one battalion of 300 men by recruitment in his home city of Philadelphia. Hey guys, you gotta go party? You gotta go beat up the English?
That's pretty impressive for back then.
Yeah.
300 people in one
300
town?
in one town, yeah. In 1776, in January, the Marines went to sea under the command of Commodore Essex Hopkins, and in March undertook the first amphibious landing in the Battle of Nassau in the Bahamas, occupying the British port for 2 weeks. On the 3rd of January, the Marines arrived at the Battle of Princeton, attached to General John Cadwalader's brigade, where he had been assigned by General George Washington, and in December of 76, Washington was retreating through New Jersey and, needing veteran soldiers, ordered Nicholas and the Marines to attach themselves to the Continental Army. The Battle of Princeton, where the Marines, along with the Cadwalader's brigade, were personally rallied by Washington, and in the first land combat engagement of the Marines, an estimated 130 Marines were present at the battle. Now, at the end of the American Revolution, both the Continental Navy and Continental Marines were disbanded. The institution was resurrected about 15 years later. In preparation for the quasi-war with France, Congress created the United States Marine Corps. Marines had been enlisted by the War Department as early as 1797 for service in newly built frigates authorized by a congressional act to provide naval armament in March of 1794. Much specified the numbers of Marines to recruit for each frigate. Now, the Marines' most famous action in this period, of course, was during the Barbary War from 1801 to 1805 against pirates, when William Eaton and First Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon led 8 Marines and 500 mercenaries in an effort to capture Tripoli. Though they only reached Derna, the action at Tripoli has been immortalized in the Marine's hymn and the Mameluke sword carried by Marine officers. During the War of 1812, Marine detachments on Navy ships took part in some great frigate duels that categorized the war and were the first and last engagements of the conflict. The most significant contribution was holding the center of General Andrew Jackson's defensive line at the 1815 Battle of New Orleans, the first major battle and one of the most one-sided engagements of the war, with widespread news of the battle and the capture of the HMS Cyan, HMS Levant, and HMS Penguin. The final engagements between the British and U.S. forces, the Marines, had gained a reputation as expert marksmen, especially in defensive and ship-to-ship actions. They played a large role in the 1813 defense of Sackett's Harbor, New York, and Norfolk, and Portsmouth, Virginia, also taking part in the 1814 defense of Plattsburgh in the Champlain Valley during one of the final British offenses along the Canadian-U.S. border. The Battle of Bladensburg, fought on the 24th of August in 1814, was one of the worst days for American arms, though a few units and individuals performed heroic service. Notable among them was Commodore Joshua Barney's 500 sailors and the 120 Marines under Captain Samuel Miller, who inflicted the bulk of British casualties and were the only effective American resistance during the battle. Kind of like these are the dudes with teeth. Now, a final desperate Marine counterattack with the fighting at close quarters, however, was not enough. Barney and Miller's forces were overrun. In all of the 114 Marines, 11 were killed and 16 were wounded. During the battle, Captain Miller's arm was badly wounded for his gallant service in action. Miller was brevetted to the rank of Major. After the war, the Marine Corps fell into a malaise that ended with the appointment of Archibald Henderson as its 5th Commandant in 1820. During his tenure, the Corps took expeditionary duties in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, Key West, West Africa, the Falklands, and Sumatra. Commandant Henderson was credited with thwarting President Jackson's attempt to combine and integrate the Marine Corps with the Army. Instead, Congress passed the Act for the Better Organization of the Marine Corps in 1834, stipulating that the Corps was part of the Department of Navy as a sister service to the Navy. This would be the first of many times that the independent existence of the Corps was challenged. We don't want to join them. You want to join? We don't want to join them. I really don't want to join them. Okay. Commandant Henderson volunteered the Marines for service in the Seminole Wars of 1835, personally leading nearly half of the entire Corps, 2 battalions, to war. A decade later, in the Mexican-American War, the Marines made their famed assault at the Chapultepec Palace in Mexico City, which would later be celebrated as the Halls of Montezuma reference in the Marines' hymn. In fairness to the U.S. Army, most of the troops who made the final assault at the Halls of Montezuma were soldiers and not Marines. The American forces were led by Army General Winfield Scott. Scott had organized 2 storming parties of about 250 men each, including 40 Marines. In the 1850s, the Marines engaged in the service in Panama and Asia and were attached to Commodore Matthew Perry's East India Squadron on its historic trip to the Far East. Now, the Marine Corps played a small role in the Civil War, for their most prominent task was blockade duty. As more and more states seceded from the Union, about a third of the Corps' officers left the United States to join the Confederacy and form the Confederate States Military Corps, Marine Corps, which ultimately played a little part in the war. The battalion of recruits formed the first Battle of Bull Run, performed poorly, retreating with the rest of the Union forces. Blockade duty included sea-based amphibious operations to secure forward bases. In late November of 61, Marines and soldiers landed a reconnaissance force from the USS Flag at Tigby Island, Georgia, to occupy the lighthouse and Martello Tower on the northern end of the island. This would later be the Army base for a bombardment of Fort Pulaski. In April and May of 62, Marines participated in the capture and occupation of New Orleans and the occupation of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Key events in the war that helped secure Union control of the lower Mississippi River Basin and denied the Confederacy a major port and naval base on the Gulf Coast. The remainder of the 19th century was marked by declining strength and introspection about the mission of the Marine Corps. The Navy's transition from sail to steam put into question the need for Marines on naval ships. Meanwhile, Marines served as a convenient resource for intervention and landings to protect American interests overseas. The Corps were involved in over 28 separate interventions in 30 years from the end of the Civil War to the end of the 19th century. They were called upon to stem political and labor unrest of the United States. Under Commandant Jacob Zellen's tenure, Marine customs and traditions took shape. The Corps adopted the Marine Corps emblem on the 19th of November, 1868. It was during this time that the Marines hymn was first heard, and around 1883 the Marines adopted their current motto, Semper, always faithful. John Philip Sousa, the musician and composer, enlisted as a Marine apprentice in age 13, served from 1867 until 1872, then again from 1880 to 1892 as leader of the Marine Band. During the Spanish-American War in 1898, Marines led American forces ashore at the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico, demonstrating their readiness for deployment. At Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the Marines seized an advanced naval base that remains in use today. And between 1899 and 1916, the Corps continued their record of participation in foreign expeditions, including the Philippine-American War, the Boxer Rebellion in China, Panama, the Cuban pacifications, the Picaderas incident in Morocco, Veracruz, Santo Domingo, and the Banana Wars in Haiti and Nicaragua. The experiences gained, the counterinsurgency and guerrilla operations during this period were consolidated into the Small Wars Manual. Nothing like learning while reading.
Mm-hmm.
During World War I, Marines served as part of the American Expeditionary Forces under General John J. Pershing when the Americans entered the war on the 6th of April, 1917. The Marine Corps had a deep pool of officers and non-commissioned officers with battle experience and thus experienced a large expansion. The United States Marine Corps entered the war with 511 officers and 13,000 enlisted personnel, and by the 11th of November 1918, they had reached a strength of 2,400 officers and 70,000 enlisted. I'll give you an idea, that's about the size of Rapid City. African Americans were entirely excluded from the Marine Corps during this conflict, and Ophia May Johnson was the first woman to enlist in the Marines.
Ooh, you don't like that. Not only a female, but black female.
Mm-hmm. And she also joined the Marine Corps Reserve in 1918 during World War I, officially becoming the first female Marine. From then until the end of World War I, 305 women enlisted in the Corps. During the Battle of Belleau Wood in 1918, the Marines and the U.S. media reported that the Germans had nicknamed them Tuftelhunden, meaning devil dogs, for their reputation as shock troops and marksmen from ranges up to 900 meters. There are no evidence of this in German records, as Teufelshunde would be proper German phrase. Nevertheless, the name stuck in the U.S. Marine lore. Now, between the World Wars, the Marine Corps was headed by John A. Lejeune, and under his leadership, the Corps studied and developed amphibious techniques that would be of great use in World War II. Many officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Earl Hancock Pete Ellis, foresaw a war in the Pacific with Japan and undertook preparations for such a conflict. Through 1941, as the prospect of war grew, the Corps pushed urgently for joint amphibious exercises with the Army and acquired amphibious equipment that would prove of great use in the upcoming conflict. Well, no kidding, Sherlock.
Ooh.
Yes, I edited that out for certain reasons.
What?
In World War II, the Marines performed a central role in the Pacific War along with the U.S. Army. The battles of Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Guam, Tinian, Cap Gloucester, Saipan, Palau, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa saw fierce fighting between Marines and the Imperial Japanese Army. Some 600,000 Americans served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II. The Battle of Iwo Jima, which began on the 19th of February 1945, was arguably the most famous Marine engagement of the war. The Japanese had learned from their defeats in the Marianas Campaign and prepared many fortified positions on the island, including pillboxes and a network of tunnels. This Japanese resistance would be fierce, but American forces would reach the summit of Mount Suribachi on the 23rd of February. The mission was accomplished with high losses of 26,000 casualties for the Americans and 22,000 Japanese. Now, the Marines played a comparatively minor role in the European theater. Nevertheless, they did contribute to provide security detachments to U.S. embassies and ships, combined personnel to small special ops teams dropped into Nazi-occupied Europe as part of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA, missions, and acted as staff planners and trainers for the U.S. Army amphibious operations. Including Normandy landings, by the end of the war, the Corps had expanded from 2 brigades to 6 divisions, 5 air wings, and the supporting troops, totaling about 485,000 Marines. In addition, 20 defense battalions and a parachute battalion were raised. Nearly 87,000 Marines were casualties during World War II, including nearly 20,000 killed. 82 were awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, in 1942, the Navy Seabees were created, with the Marine Corps providing their organization and military training. Many Seabee units were issued the USMC standard issue and redesigned Marine. Despite the Corps giving them the military organization, military training, issuing them uniforms, and redesigning their units, the Seabees remained Navy. USMC historian Gordon L. Rotman writes that the Navy's biggest contributions to the Marine Corps during World War II was the creation of the Seabees. Despite Secretary of Navy's James Forrestal's prediction that the Marine flag rising at Iwo Jima meant the Marine Corps for the next 500 years, the Corps faced an immediate institutional crisis following the war because of a suddenly shrinking budget. Army generals pushing for a strengthened and reorganized defense establishment attempted to fold the Marine mission and its assets into the Navy and Army. Drawing on hastily assembled congressional support and with the assistance of the so-called Revolt of the Admirals, the Marine Corps rebuffed such efforts to dismantle the Corps, resulting in statutory protection of the Marine Corps in the National Security Act of 1947. Shortly after, and 5 years since, the Douglas-Mansfield Act afforded the Commandant an equal voice with the Joint Chiefs of Staff on matters relating to the Marines and established the structure of 3 active divisions and air wings that remain today. Now, with the beginning of the Korean War in 1950, saw a hastily formed Provisional Marine Brigade holding a defensive line to the Pusan perimeter. To execute a flanking maneuver, General Douglas MacArthur called on United Nations forces, including U.S. Marines, to make amphibious landings at Incheon. The successful landing resulted in the collapse of the North Korean lines and the pursuit of North Korean forces north near the Yalu River until the entrance of the People's Republic of China into the war. Chinese troops surrounded, surprised, and overwhelmed the overextended and outnumbered American forces. The U.S. Army's 10th Corps, which included the 1st Marine Division and the Army's 7th Infantry Division, regrouped and inflicted heavy casualties during the fighting withdrawal to the coast, known as the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. The fighting calmed after the battle, but late in March 1953, the relative quiet of the war was broken when the People's Liberation Army launched a massive offensive on 3 fronts, manned by the 5th Marine Regiment. These outposts were codenamed Reno, Vegas, and Carson. The campaign was collectively known as the Nevada Cities Campaign. Gee, whatever. You guys went really far to find that.
Deep thoughts here.
Yeah, there was heavy, brutal fighting on Reno Hill, which was eventually captured by the Chinese. Although Reno was lost, the 5th Marines held both Vegas and Carson through the rest of the campaign. In this one campaign, the Marines suffered approximately 1,000 casualties and might have suffered much more without the U.S. Army's Task Force Faith. Marines would continue a battle of attrition against along the 38th parallel until the 1953 armistice. During the war, the Corps expanded from 75,000 regulars to a force of 261,000 Marines, mostly reservists. 30,544 Marines were killed or wounded during the war, and 42 were awarded the Medal of Honor. And the Marines also would serve in the Vietnam War, taking part in battles such as the Battle of Hue and the Battle of Quezon in 1968. Individuals from the United States Marine Corps generally operated the Northern First Corps regions of South Vietnam. While there, they were constantly engaged in a guerrilla war against the Viet Cong, along with intermittent conventional war against the North Vietnamese Army. This made the Marine Corps known throughout Vietnam and gained a frightening reputation from the Viet Cong. Portions of the Corps were responsible for a less-known combined action program that implemented unconventional techniques for counterinsurgency that worked as military advisors to the Republic of Vietnam Marine Corps. Marines were withdrawn in 1971 and returned briefly in 1975 to help evacuate Saigon and attempt to rescue the crew of the SS Mayaguez. Vietnam was the longest war up to that time for the Marines, and by its end, 13,091 had been killed in action, 51,392 had been wounded, and 57 Medals of Honor had been awarded.
Wow.
Because of the policies concerning rotation, more Marines were deployed for service during Vietnam than World War II. While recovering from Vietnam, the Corps had a detrimental low point in its service history caused by court-martials and non-judicial punishments related to partially increased unauthorized absences and desertions during the war. Overhaul of the Corps began in late 1970s, discharging the most delinquent, and once the quality of new recruits improved, the Corps focused on reforming its non-commissioned officer corps, a vital functioning part of its forces. Now, between the Vietnam War, the U.S. Marines resumed their expeditionary role, participating in their failed 1980 Iran hostage rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, Operation Urgent Fury, and the Operation Just Cause. In 1983, the Marine barracks in Beirut were bombed, causing the highest peacetime loss of the Corps in its history. 220 Marines and 21 other service members were killed, leading to the American withdrawal from Lebanon. In 1990, Marines of the Joint Task Force Sharp Edge saved thousands of lives by evacuating British, French, and American nationals from the violence of the Liberian Civil War. Now, during the Persian Gulf War of 1990 to 91, Marine task forces formed for Operation Desert Shield and later liberated Kuwait along with coalition forces in Operation Desert Storm. Marines participated in combat operations in Somalia during Operations Restore Hope II, and the United Shield to provide humanitarian relief. In 1997, Marines took part in Operation Silver Wake, the evacuation of American citizens from the U.S. Embassy in Albania. Now, following attacks of the 11th of September in 2001, President George Bush announced the global war on terrorism. The stated objective of the global war on terror was the defeat of Al-Qaeda, other terrorist groups, and any nation that supports or harbors terrorists. Since then, the Marine Corps, alongside the other military services, have engaged in global operations around the world in support of that mission. In 2009, President Barack Obama's goal of reducing spending in the Defense Department was led by Secretary Robert Gates in a series of budget cuts that did not significantly change the Corps' budgeted programs, cutting only the VH-71 Kestrel and resetting the VXX program. However, the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform singled the Corps out for the brunt of a series of recommended cuts in 2010. In light of budget sequestration, General James Amos in 2013 set a goal force of 174,000 Marines. He testified that this was the minimum number that would allow for an effective response to even a single contingency operation, but it would reduce the peacetime ratio of time at home bases to times deployed down to a historical low level. Marines and other American forces began staging in Pakistan and Uzbekistan on the border of Afghanistan in early of October 2001 in preparation for Operation Enduring Freedom. The 15th and 26th Marine Expeditionary Units were some of the first conventional units into Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in November of that year. After that, Marine battalions and squadrons rotated through, engaging Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. Marines of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit fled to the Taliban-held town of Kashmir in Helmand Province in April 2008, in its first major American operation in the region in years. In June of 2009, 7,000 Marines of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade were deployed to Afghanistan in an effort to improve security and began Operation Strike of the Sword the next month, in February 2010. The 2nd MEB launched the largest offensive of the Afghan campaign since 2001, the Battle of Miraj, to clear the Taliban from their key stronghold in the Helmand province. After Miraj, Marines progressed north up into the Helmand River and cleared the towns of Kaji and Shangan, and Marines remained in the Helmand province until 2014. So, as you know, the way you can look at some of our military forces, especially the Marines, you know, they handle a lot of the, how you want to best put it, they're not exactly nitpicky jobs. They're jobs that need to be done. And our Marines have been doing it since, you know, the 1700s. You know, when we had to go fight pirates originally, when we had to go help open up harbors. You know, the Marines have done a lot of things. The thing that always impressed me is one of my bosses was from the Marine Corps, and the way that it's kind of cool the way that they taught loyalty and friendship with the Marines is that it was almost like a second family. You know, it's like they would memorize the date that they originally enlisted as a second birthday. And, you know, the Marines, yeah, once you're part of the Marine, you're always a Marine. And it always amazed some of the people that I yacked with in the last couple of years when it comes to military forces. But so technically you can say, you know, happy birthday to the U.S. Marine Corps. Officially went into foundation on the 11th of July, 1798, and they're still serving to this day. But a little bit of our history tidbit, folks, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye, peoples.